Back at PayPal for the first time in over a month, the San Jose Earthquakes hosted the New York Red Bulls, and despite going down a goal early, they were able to equalize and then see out the final third of the game with 10 players after DeJuan Jones was given a pretty questionable red card. The team showed grit yet again, and we were able to celebrate the night back at PayPal Park with our first ever fireworks performance. In this video, we'll be going over the game and taking a look at the next match, the quarterfinals of the US Open Cup against Austin FC. Taking it from the top, starting 11. Honestly, the starting 11 is pretty good. It's great. It represents our most competitive group of players and the ones that we've gotten accustomed to seeing, particularly in the past 3 games. There definitely is a sense that there is a more well-defined starting 11 and identity for this team as opposed to the beginning of the season where we're seeing lots of rotation and experimentation as Bruce Arena was still trying to get to know his group of players. However, much like we saw in May, it's not just about the starting 11 and taking things one game at a time, because the reality is that this is another 3-game week and one in which difficult decisions probably have to be made about which games should be prioritized. Particularly in this case, it's about balancing how to approach an MLS matchup at home, which is then followed by a US Open Cup quarterfinal hosted at home 3 days later. And so while yes, many of us do agree that this is the best lineup that the Quakes have to offer with, maybe 1 or 2 tweaks just based on personal preference, there are some of us who disagree that in this game, this wasn't the group of players to be playing, and maybe rotation should have happened. So the question I want to explore before getting into the game is this: to rotate or not to rotate? Should the Earthquakes have rotated players, potentially putting this result against the New York Red Bulls at risk, to then get an advantage in having our best players rested and ready for this next Tuesday clash against Austin FC? It's not an easy question to answer, so let's start off with some context. So far, we've played 2 Open Cup games under Bruce Arena, and how he handled those 2 games were completely different. The first one was against Sacramento, which was played only days after an MLS game against Portland at home. In that one, we actually saw our best players playing in the MLS match, and then against Sacramento, we saw a lot of rotation. But then for the second Open Cup game, which was again against Portland Timbers, this was followed after the game against New England Revolution. That game against New England Revolution, we did rotate very heavily, and then we played our best players against Portland. So what we came away with from those 2 games is that either Bruce Arena or the Quakes front office, or maybe even both, were willing to take risks in MLS matches if it meant gaining an advantage in the Open Cup. And then as for the opponent, because of course it's not just a vacuum, we do have to consider who we're playing in these MLS games. The Red Bulls are a unique opponent here because they're also playing in the Open Cup and have to face the same difficult decisions that we do when it comes to rotation. They'll be playing the Philadelphia Union on Wednesday, which does give them an extra day to rest, but that rest day basically gets burned in having to travel across the whole country after this game in San Jose. Looking back at their last Open Cup game, this was directly following a derby that they had against New York City FC, and for that game against New York, they did play all their best players, and then when it came to the Open Cup, they faced off against Dallas. In that game, it was some bit of rotation. The attack and the keeper were definitely rotated, but then the defense and most of the midfield was kept intact. So the takeaway from that is that you can't really draw any conclusions other than that they are not willing to risk an MLS game for the sake of any advantage in the Open Cup. Now, with that context in mind, we can talk about whether the Quakes handled this situation correctly. As we saw on Saturday, we did not rotate against New York Red Bulls, and neither did they. This now points to rotation being allowed against weak teams and or when on the road, but not necessarily rotation when we just have an upcoming Open Cup game. With the result having been a draw, it's hard to say whether this was the right or wrong move. Had we won, we could say, yes, this was worth it since we got the 3 points in MLS, and maybe we did jump a position or 2 in the standings. Had we lost, we would be saying it was the wrong move as it didn't give us any benefit and now only poses a disadvantage going into this game 3 days later. On one hand, based on how the Red Bulls have treated the Open Cup previously, the Quakes had to assume they'd bring their A game, and therefore we had to put our most competitive lineup as well. On top of this, there is that responsibility of playing at home for the first time in a month on 4th of July weekend, on the night where we'd have the first ever fireworks show at PayPal. So yeah, for the front office, it's kind of painting this picture that, yeah, this is a game that is very important because from the average fan's perspective, we know that there's just way more attendance at these MLS games than Open Cup games. And we don't want to be disappointing more people than we need to, right? And in terms of how the game actually played out, it did make for a really entertaining game, seeing both teams play with their best players. Both teams had very high energy and speed all game. The Quakes had a pretty high volume of chances to score, and with the red card, it really did serve us well to have our best 10 players there for, handling that brutal 30 minutes in which the team actually somehow started looking even better and more threatening. And yeah, the way the game played out, it really did feel like the closing moments of the Portland game on the road a few weeks back, where we were able to equalize and paint that game as a victory in some ways. But on the other hand, this kind of decision-making does seem a little bit short-sighted. Had I not shown you the result before the last Open Cup game, would you have remembered it was a 0-0 draw against New England? Now, let me ask you this. When we lost to Sacramento in the Open Cup last year, what was the score of the MLS game right before then? It was at home, so a good amount of people listening were probably at that game. And if you need a hint, the opponent wears purple. It was a 1-0 loss to Orlando. One strong counterattack in the dying moments of the game. I think it was like the 89th minute. Really brutal way to lose that game. And then days later, we go on with the disappointment of being knocked out of the Open Cup. But anyways, my guess is that the majority of people do not remember that result. But we do remember that disappointment of having gone out to Sacramento in the Open Cup in extra time, which was, like I said, only a few days later. And we probably remember the losses against Kansas City in playoffs, but not necessarily the losses against Kansas City in regular MLS matches. So what I'm trying to say is that these sort of knockout single elimination games have this unique ability to stick in our minds for years to come, whether it's a win or a loss. This year we've been given a sporting advantage in being able to play all of our Open Cup games at home, and should we advance to the semifinals, there's a 50-50 chance of playing that at home. And if we make it to the final, then regardless of who that opponent is, we'd be guaranteed to host that final right here in San Jose. That kind of a chance isn't going to repeat itself for a long time. And on top of that, it aligns with the one in past 5 years where we truly do have a competitive team, where we have really strong depth, we have really big names in the starting 11. So I call this decision short-sighted because we have a true chance of winning the Open Cup this year, and with our recent form in MLS and position in the Western Conference, we also do have some wiggle room in the race to make it to the playoffs. This isn't like previous years where it's one or the other. Sure, it could come down to a really thin margin at the end of the season, but is this 1 point against New York going to be the make it or break it on whether we make it to playoffs or not? Even in the case of having lost this game with the rotated team. If we reach the end of the season and come up short of the playoff line by a point or two, I wouldn't say that it was because of this game against New York where we rotated to prioritize the quarterfinals of the Open Cup. If we come up short by a point or two, I'd blame last week's game against the Galaxy where we played a game in front of over 40,000 supporters with no official LA Galaxy supporter group in stadium against the worst LA Galaxy team in the history of this league, and couldn't beat that opponent who had up until that point only won a single game in 19, 20 matches. Or if we don't want to be that specific, we could blame any other match where we didn't win against the Western Conference team. But giving 3 points to the Red Bulls is not directly consequential to our position in the Western Conference. Them increasing their points does not take away from our position. And not that we could have known this at the time, but Austin's game against LAFC did get postponed, meaning they'll be able to play against us with their most competitive selection of players fully rested. Now, on the other hand of that situation is they haven't played in 10 days, and I think their last game was a loss. So it's not like they have great momentum, and maybe they did want to have that, mental refresh of being able to play a game, maybe getting a result. But when it comes to either being rested for 10 days or having to have this short turnaround, I think I would rather have more rest than too little rest. Right now, it's easy to feel good because we did pull off a draw and withheld 30 minutes of having a player down. This draw is no small merit, and the Quakes did give fans in attendance what we wanted for the night. Of course, 3 points would have been ideal, but 1 point given the circumstance, I think it's pretty acceptable. But come Tuesday evening, depending on who we see in the lineup, could definitely change the perspective of this result and the decision-making that was made for this game. Is that fair to the team of Bruce Arena? Honestly, no, but it's inevitably what's going to be going through all of our minds anyways. But only time will tell what we see in that game. As for what went into this result, I think the Quakes did a couple things well and differently from past games. Obviously, holding it down for 30 minutes with a player less is probably the biggest accomplishment of the night. And we did it in style too. We didn't, bunker up and just sit back and try to just wait out those 30 minutes. We subbed in Benji Kikanovic, Buda, and Judd, who are typically associated with being attacking players. And the team did look a lot more threatening in the final third of the match. Yes, there were some moments where Buda did have to put his body on the line to stop a dangerous cross or a shot, but we did see pretty strong counterattacks, which we weren't seeing in the first 60 minutes in the game. Something I did notice in this game as well was more usage of overlapping runs between center backs and the wing backs. Particularly, we'd see Romney carry the ball higher than Vitor Costa at times, and at one point, I even saw Rodriguez doing this as well, almost pushing into what would be that left wing position. It was surprising because Quakes already play a pretty high line of defense, oftentimes close to or at the middle of the field. So to see them actually cross in the opposition half, dribbling and getting involved with passes, at least for me, was something new. I feel like we haven't seen that in a long time. And if I had to guess on why we saw this, as well as just the greater freedom for players positionally on the field throughout the whole game, I'd guess that since Red Bulls are a team that likes man marking and high pressing, having players leave their expected positions means that either those Red Bull defenders have to, quote unquote, hand off defensive responsibilities amongst each other, or they have to commit to actually chasing that player, that Quakes player that is leaving their position. And in doing that could potentially get pulled out of position, which then opens up space on the field for the Quakes to exploit. What that translated into, as well as just the consistency that we've seen from Espinosa and DeJuan Jones and Vitor Costa as well, we did have a really high volume of crosses. I think it was something around like 26, if I'm not mistaken. That's a lot of crosses for one game. Most of them were low driven, so it was kind of like single trick pony kind of thing, but the volume of them was going to eventually translate to a goal. And we saw this in the first half where Josef Martinez almost got one. It was a cross from Vitor Costa that kind of just got caught between his legs. It was a really fast ball, so I don't necessarily blame him, but we definitely would have liked to see that go in. And then in the second half, of course, Vitor forced that with an own goal. I think that was a cross of Espinosa. And then to finalize the positives, I think an honorable mention does have to go to Daniel. Daniel was given the Man of the Match award, and while I'm not totally convinced that he was the best on the night, I do think a lot of credit does have to be given for those 3 solid saves that kept this game leveled. In terms of what the Quakes struggled with, I mean, the one that jumps out to me most obviously is Forsberg. He was menacing with multiple strong dribbles at or even through our defense. His goal made our defense look really, really bad. Rodriguez had a moment of uncertainty on whether to dive into a tackle or not. Daniel Muni let his runner through to try to compensate and help Rodriguez, which I suppose it's a nice gesture, but it's still questionable to just let another attacker run into our box unmarked. DeJuan Jones finds himself in a similar position where he tries to support Rodriguez, leaving another player open on the left, but isn't really able to compete for the tackle. It just kind of gets, Forsberg just dances around the defense. There's no other way of putting it. And of course, the cherry on top is that Forsberg, somehow stumbling over, is able to manage a shot that gets through all of those 3 players and even Danielle. So there's a lot that looked really bad for the Quakes defense on that play, but with a player that talented, it seems almost expected that a goal like this is just going to come at some point. And normally conceding just 1 is fine, and that's what we saw in this game, but the problem in this game is that the Quakes just were not clinical. Our best chance of the game was from Vitor Costa in front of goal, one-on-one with the keeper, and the ball went completely wide of the net. Just look at the player reactions on field, and that'll tell you everything you need to know about how golden that opportunity was. The few moments our other players had weren't that much better either, though. We definitely hope for more from Josef Martinez when receiving a low-driven cross, when he's just, a couple yards away from goal. But, these kind of nights happen, and I'd much rather them happen now than happen again in the Open Cup like we saw for Pellegrino against Sacramento. And, of course, there's also a lot of talk about whether the red card was justified or not. I didn't have a great view of that tackle, but watching it back, it did look a little soft for a yellow card and expulsion. But like mentioned before, the team did well to adapt and continue imposing themselves on the game. All in all, 1-1 as a scoreline I do think seems fair for what we saw. While we did have way more volume in attacking plays, it was the Red Bulls that had the better chances in terms of just being more dangerous. The team overcame 30 minutes of missing a player and did the best with what they had. This result is just another example of how much the team has improved from past seasons. Holding onto a point like this would have been near impossible with the mindset and talent of last year's team. And then in terms of news of things that are going on with the Quakes, the biggest that came out in this past week, we did get more news on Hernan Lopez, so this might be the last segment of quote-unquote Hernan Watch. I guess it's not technically official from the Quakes side, but we've seen it now from Argentinos Juniors. I think it was either Friday, the day before the game, that they started posting their announcements of Hernan Lopez, a new signing, he's finally joining. Hernan Lopez was also posting those. He was posting tons of pictures of himself as a kid, as a supporter of Argentinos Juniors. Seems like he's very happy with that move. And then Tom Bogert, which is, I guess you could call him like the guru of transfers in MLS, did say that this move would open up that designated player slot, which implies that Argentinos Juniors are either covering Hernan's full salary as a loan, or they've actually just flat out bought Hernan from us as a transfer. And like we mentioned in the last video, it's a shame that this move didn't pan out for the Quakes the way we'd hoped for, with him being a record transfer signing and the name that he had and the fame that he has of, the bloodline and all the highlight reels. We definitely did expect more. I think it's just an unfortunate situation. We've talked about this in previous videos. It's unfortunate that he just couldn't fit into Bruce Arena's system, whether it be because of tactical fitness, a drop in skill, not fully recovered from that shoulder surgery that he had. I think it was in March. I think there's just a lot of factors, and also with the shape that the team plays now, with the 3-4-3, we don't really need a traditional 10, and Hernan doesn't have the characteristics that Bo LaRue or Harks have. And so he's kind of like the next one up, and a player on that salary, of that fame, pedigree, whatever you want to call it, Hernan isn't happy about being a sub player either. So I think it makes sense for the Quakes to now have that salary cap open, to have that ability to get a designated player in a position on the field that will be more impactful. And it also allows Hernan to continue his development and continue his career in the way that he wants. And maybe he's also, part of it is just him being homesick. So I think no matter how you look at this, it's disappointing that didn't work out. But the fact that we're stuck in this position, some resolution had to be made. And I think this is the one that benefits everyone that's involved. But now we look ahead. Hopefully that is the last of the Hernan news. If there's any more info, we'll throw it in the comments description. I think just knowing that the designated player slot is open is probably the last bit of news that we needed. So hopefully the Quakes are officially able to confirm that in the days to come. But for now, we look ahead. Austin FC quarterfinals. We've been saying must-win games. It feels like, 5-6 times now this season, but every game in the Open Cup that we advance just becomes a bigger, more capitalized, bigger font, must-win game. So excited for that one. Hopefully we can get the result and continue on because, like I said, this is the best opportunity the Quakes have had for winning the Open Cup in many years. So we're all hoping that to take it seriously. We all hope that it's a good game, and above all else, that we can advance to the semifinals. If you made it this far, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you after the Austin game. Thanks.